What We Do in Reeves' Shoes by Hunt Zahawi and Mel Stride. 3 Tories with some experience in the area. Fucking Nadeem Zahawi was Chancellor of the Exchequer for fucking 3 days. How long was Nadeem Zahawi Chancellor for? Let me find out. From July to September of 2022. Literally 2 months. He was Chancellor for 2 months. You don't get to say, I have some experience in being Chancellor of the Exchequer because you were Chancellor for fucking 2 months. Mel Stride hasn't even been Chancellor. He's the Shadow Chancellor, which he basically got given because he ran in the leadership election. Mel Stride was only in the DWP, right? I hate this article that you've shown me here, Ben, because it starts with, lots of people think a Chancellor is being like being Santa Claus with lots of goodies to dole out. The reality is rather different, as both Rachel Reeves and I have found out. No one thinks this. Everyone thinks that being the Chancellor is difficult. New book, Can We Be Great Again? This is just borrowing Trumpism. Like, this is just how cooked. This is how cooked, like, mainstream conservatives are at this point. This is how cooked they are, in that all they know is just to copy other successful conservatives, right? Kemi Badenoch out there trying to ape Nigel Farage. Jeremy Hunt here trying to ape Donald Trump, right? They literally do not know how to do politics. They have spent their entirety of their time as political actors on easy mode, running on the easiest mode possible, just constantly being given deference that they do not deserve and being voted for out of habit by people who don't understand politics very well. And what this has meant is that they have forgotten how to try and win people over, and they don't know how to actually create a narrative or create an identity for themselves or a political position, an ideology that might link in with the public. So they're just left, like, licking up the dregs that have been left over by actual populists like Trump and Farage. It's so funny to me just how cooked the Tories are that they don't even have any ideas of their own anymore. The biggest difference between good and bad governments is the extent to which you manage to carve out space for long-term decisions as opposed to daily firefighting. That's literally all the Tories did. Like, you were fucking health secretary, and all you did were short-term decisions. Oh, we need to cut money from the health budget, so let's just have a pay freeze. Doesn't matter if people leave the country to go and work in Australia, or if nurses have to use food banks and become less good at their job because of all the, starving that they're doing. No, who cares? We just need to save money right here, right now, whilst interest rates are 0% because Reinhard Rogoff said so, right? Jeremy Hunt's modus operandi for his entire political career has been daily firefighting and short-termism. Sort of an argument that it was him who created the British Business Bank, which was essentially him copying a Corbyn-era policy on small business and infrastructure investment, except instead of equity or for cooperative funding, it was just fucking subsidy. It was just SOPs for business, But it was at the very least kind of pinched from Jeremy Corbyn. Outside of that, all of Jeremy Hunt's fiscal and ministerial decisions have all been for short-termism. Did you see the free school meal stuff? I did see the free school meal stuff, yes. We haven't covered it really, but most people in my chat will just agree with me that the free school meal stuff is good. It's not going far enough. They should be universal free school meals. And we'll be covering universal free school meals with a segment. We've got to watch some Jeremy Vine stuff again because that's where I get half my content from nowadays. But we'll cover the free school meal stuff. Don't worry. We'll get onto it. First, given the austerity cuts about to be imposed on the police and criminal justice system, are we going to invest in modernising them so they can really deliver better outcomes with less money? Police officers spend up to 8 hours a week on unnecessary admin tasks, whilst they are crying out for modern IT systems, which are normally the first casualty of any spending negotiations. If we want services to improve, things that unlock greater efficiency should be top and not bottom of a government's list. Well, yeah, of course, but you spent all of those years in government trying to find efficiency savings that just weren't there. Sure, we should upgrade in IT, but that involves actual investment rather than budget cuts. You literally say already it's austerity, right? Well, where's the fucking funding for this going to come from? This is operational expenditure. I think you're absolutely right, Ollie, yeah. Tory approach to spending reviews was to go into them with the decision that we needed to make cuts established beforehand, and then to make those cuts by underfunding every programme rather than scrapping any programmes and fully funding the others, which is what you would ideally do if making cuts. Well, that's the problem, right? When you have a spending review, it's just about setting departmental budgets, but the policy that you set on which bits of those departments stick around should be done in the fiscal statements that's been made, right? So as you say, it's a really stupid way of doing government, which everything is underfunded because they've never made any announcements to cut things because they know it's politically unfeasible to do so. Second, when Europe is at war, I mean, Ukraine is at war, Europe isn't at war yet. You cannot commit to a program that costs 3% of GDP and only provide 2.5% in funding, as the government appears to have done. Well, no. What they say is that we're going to spend 2.5% of GDP now and 3% we're going to ramp up to by the end of the parliament. I mean, it's dumb. I think it's stupid, but I don't know what he's trying to say here, unless I'm reading this really incorrectly. That is a scandalous and dangerous black hole if ever there was one, not least a fortnight before the NATO summit. I was at the table when Trump nearly pulled the US out of NATO in 2018, so we're taking a big risk. But if we plug the gap, France and Germany are likely to as well. If we don't and the US pulls out of NATO, will we not be the 3% we argue over but double that? Keir Starmer has shown he can be an international statesman. Now really is the moment we need him to do the right thing. Literally, he's just out of saying, well, why don't we make cuts and efficiency savings in the police department? You know, get the criminal justice system to do a bake sale to ensure that they're able to fund the access to legal representation for people who will come from poor backgrounds. So I give bake sales for that. However, what the government needs to be doing is buying more bombs. Think of what Trump will say if we don't spend 3% of GDP on defence. Literally, the only part of the budget which not only politicians but journalists as well insist on never being cut and will go head over heels to ask for more money for is just defence. That's it. It's the only department that gets away with it. He's one of the first, wasn't he, to start serving up the NHS for American investors. I don't think his opinion is remotely valid, let alone unbiased. Well, exactly. So dumb for him to talk about long-term thinking and long-term planning when he flogged off bits and pieces of the NHS for cheap, for worse outcomes, higher costs, and less efficiency. So dumb. Finally, we have to avoid the doom loop of even higher taxes creating ever lower growth. I mean, that's not true. The idea that there is somehow a link between high taxes and low growth is just fucking nonsensical. It's just complete bullshit. The only way that you can ever justify the idea that taxation means lower growth is if you just think that the government can't spend money to grow the economy, which is fucking untrue. It is totally untrue, and the entirety of the boom years post-Great Depression because of things like the New Deal or post-war consensus are living historical and ever-present proof that that's the case. It's just total nonsense. That means longer-term supply-side policies to boost our growth rate, but I thought you didn't want to spend. In the short term, the only game in town is welfare reform, as I explain in my new book. Literally, we have to spend 3% of the GDP on weapons to try and kill people. But why don't we kill our own disabled people? Because that's much easier, because that doesn't cost money to kill disabled people. He spent a whole paragraph here detailing about how it must be necessary as an international statesman to spend 3% of GDP on defence, even though the NATO target is only 2%. Only the very next point to say we have spending too much money, we need to cut back on things, and we have to make welfare reform cuts. These people are despicable. These people are despicable. Why pay money to kill people abroad when you can kill people at home and save money? That's literally the argument. Getting the working age benefits bill to 2019 levels saves £49 billion, more than enough for 3% of GDP on defence and to avoid tax rises. It would also be far better for people on benefits to be in work. Most people are in work. Our labour force participation rate is not that low in terms of what it was before the pandemic, for example. The big issue is that people went through a mass disabling event, and loads of people who are in work have to have welfare payments to afford to live because of the shitty economy that you made, Jeremy. That's your fault. 15 years of wage compression from 2009 to 2024. Welfare reform isn't sexy for Labour, but with a large majority in 4 years in the mandate, if not now, when? Never. Don't do welfare reform. Don't take away money from people who need it. The best welfare reform is higher wages. Get people who currently are requiring universal credit to live higher wages so they don't need to claim it anymore. Don't cut the welfare bill. Boost the in-work benefit of being in work by having higher wages and collective bargaining. And again, every single cut that you make to the welfare sector comes with a negative externality that has to be dealt with however many years down the line. Again, literally again, right? First paragraph, right? We must stop doing short-termism and carve out space for long-term decisions. The long-term impact of welfare cuts is more NHS spending down the line from all the people that you've impoverished, all the children who grow up with stunted growth and with poor educational outcomes because of that poverty, is the long-term problem that will give us even worse growth and even more state expenditure and a higher welfare bill all the way down the line, right? They tried cutting welfare from people to get them off benefits in the 2010s. It did not fucking work. It didn't work. They are beating the same drum, running around in circles, proposing the same shit over and over and over and over and over and over again, and they still don't get the idea that it's stupid and it doesn't work. Neoliberalism is an actual death cult. Literally, it is a death cult. It is actually a death cult. So true, so true. There was a guy who was like an education sector advisor for the Tories up in the 2010s, right? Sam Friedman, I think it was. And he did an interesting book, apparently, about what went wrong in governance. Although a lot of the time, I think that Mariana Mazzucato has it correct. People subcontract out not just the actual operations of the public sector, the private sector. They will subcontract out the decisions of government to the private sector through consultancies, right? They will spend billions of pounds every year getting consultants to make policy for them. Chancellor for a day, Nadeem Sahawi has to say. Rachel Reeves is in a difficult position. As the only cabinet member with real private sector experience, Steve Reed does, I guess, technically, she should by now understand the difficulties business are facing because of the government's actions, not to mention families. Fixing this is to be able to reduce the tax burden, and that requires getting serious about growth. Literally, all they know is eat hot chip, cut taxes and lie. This is in the entirety of conservative governance. It's just, you know what, taxes are too high. I know every other European country, we are below the median because every other country realised that if you have an ageing population, you need to spend money on healthcare, which requires higher taxes. No, we're just going to keep banging the low tax drum no matter how preposterous that proposition is. Serious about growth. That will come from getting out of the way, deregulating and allowing supply-side reforms. It also means attracting investment rather than driving it away. Literally, just we need to cut taxes and deregulate. Point, Thatcherism as an ideology doesn't even have like a material basis. For all you say about Thatcher, and we will come to Ian Dale after we've finished this, right? For all you say about Thatcher, at least she had vision. At least she had the courage of her convictions and had a detailed understanding of why she thought her plan would work. Now, it didn't work, and I disagreed with the plan, and I thought it was bad, but at the very least, she understood the rationale behind the policies that she was enacting, right? And yet, her disciples, her followers, the progeny of Thatcherism, are so fucking stupid. They're so bereft of thought, bereft of vision, totally empty, hollow people whose only concern is getting into elected positions for the sake of doing so in a public sector check, right? They just follow it like it's scripture. They don't understand the rationale. They don't understand why Thatcher thought what she did. They just go, Thatcher did it, I've named my grandchild Thatcher, and therefore we must do the same thing because that is good because Thatcher did it, you know? It's received wisdom, and it's scripture. They recite it like scripture without any understanding for the rationale behind it. Because if you understood the rationale, you'd realise that it was totally fucked up and wrong and never worked. If you think, well, this guy is a big, rich petrochemical man, he must not need to hoodwink himself into getting into public sector just for the paycheck, right? But this is the same guy that used public money to heat his fucking stables. So, you know, this guy really is on the take. The closure of the non-DOMS regime has been a catastrophe for this. I mean, Jeremy Hunt was the one who proposed it, but okay. Signaling that Britain isn't interested in prosperity. A flat rate charge for wealthy individuals and entrepreneurs, as they do in Italy, would be a smart move and worth eating humble pie over. No! Hey, if you want to do business here, you pay your taxes here. Rome has 2,200 multimillionaires settled there, raising hundreds of millions in tax and investment for the Italian people. If the Chancellor can tempt them into the UK through a mix of more welcoming tax regime and a pledge to tackle law and order concerns, we could be back in business. Having them just sitting around being fat waste, buying up assets with their capital they can use to outcompete poor people is not good for the economy. What do you think they're going to make investments in other than just an ever-expanding property and financial asset market, just like they have done for the last 15 years since you guys got into government in 2010? That's what will happen and is what has happened. Honestly, I don't think you really need to blame the tax regime as to why multimillionaires are in Rome and not Swindon. Aren't the Italians perpetually broke? Yep. London is home to 215,700 millionaires, according to Henley and Partners. Yeah, but a lot of them are probably just homeowners. But you're right, like, this millionaire exodus stuff is really fucking beaten to death. And as we'd seen, it's a very tiny percentage, as was pointed out by patriotic millionaires. And the data they have in terms of high net worth individuals leaving the country is based on fucking LinkedIn profiles, so... Even before counting their ingenuity and investment, if we attracted just 3,000 new wealthy residents to Britain, charging them £400,000 per year to have an equivalent of non-dom tax status, we would be able to reverse the winter fuel allowance cut. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to charge these people a flat 400k rate if it would get them to pay tax in the country. I just don't think it's the tax that's making them stay here or leave here. I think it's literally everything else, right? On top of this, why would they come back for £400,000 when the previous non-dom rule was £30,000? Doesn't seem... Taking this further and aiming for the sort of numbers America is hoping to attract with their golden visa program, and she could do anything from abolishing the hated inheritance tax, which does so much to destroy family businesses and long-term investment in Britain, to an immediate increase in defence to 3% of GDP or more. Literally, exactly the same as what we heard from Jeremy Hunt, which was cut everything else, slash taxes for people, give multimillionaires even more tax breaks, and also business owners and farmers tax breaks, but also at the same time increase military expenditure because we must be able to blow people up. Like, and again, we'll point out it is high-paid workers who are the biggest driver of growth in the Western world at the moment. It is demand-side policy that allows the supply side to meet it in the modern era of politics. We're back in New Deal era politics. So banging on about supply-side reforms and tax cuts and inheritance tax cuts are literally on just fucking dead assets that posh boy wankers are trying to give to their posh children, you know? Like, who cares? Honestly, the idea that this is destroying family businesses is just total nonsense, you know? Total nonsense. No one is nixing long-term investment because their kids might not be able to inherit every single penny of it. Popular, easy fiscal policies which would unlock so much investment and revenue for the government. Citation needed. All Reeves needs to do is convince Labour not to hate wealth creators, which I grant may be a steep political challenge. Someone who already has millions of pounds in assets does not create wealth for anybody. They hoard wealth. They inflate asset prices. That doesn't create wealth, because wealth is the actual physical assets themselves, right? It is actual productive capacity, which involves workers doing work and creating things, and not millionaires bidding up the price of property. This man's so dumb. I can't believe they made him the Exchequer for 2 months. Hilarious that they didn't do any of this when in power, so right-wingers hate them too. We're basically at the position now, Ben, where the Conservative policy prospectus is so pie in the sky because they are basically in the position that Reform were in at the last election, of no hope of getting into government, no hope of winning enough seats, no chance in hell of being politically relevant, so they can just say whatever they want because they know they're not getting into government, which is ironic considering that this is the most successful political party in the history of the world. Literally, they even meme about it. Nadine Sahar was Conservative Chancellor for 2 months. Well, I'm glad that the Times are taking the piss out of him for it as well. This is Mel Stride, the last one we're going to look at in this article. I want chat. Give me an over-under. This person who used to be head of the Department of Work and Pensions when the Tories were in government, right? What's the over-under that one of the big things that Mel Stride talks about in his piece on how to fix the economy is cutting the welfare budget? What do you think is the likelihood that what he says is, let's make disabled people die through cuts? vouchers, literally, Leah, like trying to cut the welfare bill by doing food vouchers or whatever. 95% chance, 100%? I think it's really high that he thinks that the biggest problem in terms of the fiscal envelope is how much we spend on welfare, and that we should cut it, but for the workless and for the disabled and not for the pensioners, even though pensioners are also workless. Like, he's not going to mention the triple lock, he's not going to mention winter fuel, because he was banging on at Keir Starmer over how you need to look into his heart to reverse the winter fuel cuts, right? But he'll take aim at the disabled and young people, but will leave pensioners to their gilded triple lock. 90% chance, 100%, 101%. Okay, we have our guesses in chat. Let's have a look, shall we? We're in Rachel Reeves' shoes next week. I would do things very differently. First, I'd level with the public. Our country faces serious economic constraints, and Labour's reckless policies are only deepening those problems. High debt, sluggish growth, the rising cost of living and sluggish growth was your government? Like, I'm not trying to say that necessarily going to be fixing the cost of living and the country's national debt, or indeed the level to which that we don't have a fast-growing economy because of Rachel Reeves' doing. You're not going to be able to defend Rachel Reeves on that axis, right? But these were all problems of the Conservative government. So maybe we wasn't actually in a financial position at the time, right? It's interesting that they are getting him on as an expert when he's literally just the shadow chancellor. You know, whereas Jeremy Hunt was chancellor for 2 years and Nadhim Zahawi was chancellor for 2 months. This guy hasn't even been the chancellor. He's just the shadow chancellor. So I'm interested to see what he has to say. Labour's main problem has not been telling the public we are in a difficult situation, we need to make difficult decisions. It's basically what they've been saying the whole time, right? And that's the irony, of course, is that the public actually don't have any time for hearing about difficult decisions anymore. I think in the public consciousness, a lot of what we've been hearing is the idea that difficult decisions have been the modus operandi of every government since 2010, right? Since the financial crisis, right? There was a difficult decision for counter-cyclical stimulus. There was a difficult decision for austerity. There was a difficult decision for Brexit. There was a difficult decision for the pandemic. There was a difficult decision because of Ukraine, right? People are sick of difficult decisions and they want something positive. They want, like, an actual solution to the problems and a light at the end of the tunnel. And yet Labour are giving them more of the same continuity Osborneism. Of course, there isn't any actual appetite for. People don't want continuity Osborneism. Even like Tory voters want the level of government expenditure to increase, right? And as I said before, I think most people in this country, when you ask them, are you happy to pay more taxes? They would go like, well, I don't necessarily want to, but if I'm going to pay taxes, I wouldn't mind as long as those got commensurate increases in public expenditure and the public services looked like they were actually working, right? The problem, of course, is that would require a very long, sustained increase in the spending envelope to be able to fix all of the problems that have been created by decades of underfunding, decades of private finance initiatives, decades of public sector subcontraction, decades of underinvestment in the actual infrastructure itself. There's like rack concrete, all that kind of malarkey that has completely laid waste to the public sector. And to make that argument to people, you have to go, well, look, we need the decade of national renewal, and that's going to come with hefty tax increases on the rich primarily, but mostly on everyone too. Like, they're not really leveling with people in terms of not taxing working people more than they are already currently taxing working people, because they're increasing that via fiscal drag. It's just people don't notice if it's fiscal drag. After 2017, the middle class felt the cuts, I think. 2015 was just the poor. I actually think it came much later than that. It was the pandemic and the Ukraine war that really saw kind of like the gargantuan kind of lurgoyf of international capital that had ate up all of the assets of the working class for all of the post-2008 period up until the pandemic. And then all the extra liquidity that was pumped into international markets throughout the pandemic through fiscal expansion because of the necessity of paying for things like furlough, that all, as Gary Stevenson points out, trickled up to the top. And once the rich have even more extra liquidity, they pump it into the existing assets they already own to maximize the value on those assets, right? And so they could also buy up assets and outcompete middle-class people as well as working-class people. And because these same middle-class people are kind of sold on capitalism as an ideology, they don't understand, like, the material basis for anti-capitalism in the same way that a lot of poorer people do. They have taken to conspiracy theory to explain how their perfect system is being undermined, right? You don't see young people in their 20s banging on about how our country has been ruined by the World Economic Forum controlling the government and ruining the system from the inside, being like the fifth column. Young people will just go, well, it's just late-stage capitalism, isn't it? Young people will go, well, it's just because the Tories screwed everything up and the right wing are bad at governance, which is of course true. Whereas a lot of people who were sold on the end of history that they were sold in the post kind of 90s era, the post-Soviet era, they can't quantify how we could even be in this situation because capitalism is the end of history and it's perfect. So if it is failing, it must be being failed. And so you must invent a fifth column that is the problem that's caused this, whether it's migrants, whether it's the World Economic Forum, whether it's 15-minute cities or trans people or whoever it is, right? You can't blame the system itself because you're already sold that the system is perfect. Because they're seeing all the assets that they ostensibly worked hard for during the 90s and the 2000s being gobbled up by the kind of machine of private equity. The family capitalist of yesteryear doesn't really exist much anymore. Being a small business owner is impossible, right? Like, I was reading some insane shit that happens in this country in the access to a commercial let as a business owner, as a small business owner, you have to have a guaranteed level of rental payments over a certain period of the minimum contract length to the private people who own all of the commercial real estate. If your business goes under midway through the contract with your private commercial landlord, they will expect to be remunerated for the remainder of that contract time period. And so if your business goes under and you lose all the assets that you can't sell to be able to repay down that rent, they will be able to take you to civil claims and force you to sell your fucking house to pay those debts. That's insane. That's absolutely insane that people have lost their houses because their business has gone under, because they have 2 years left on the rental contract with their commercial landlord, right? Like, we, on the left, talk insane shit about private landlords in the residential sector, which, you know, is bad and really, really bad, right? But the commercial landlord sector is just as bad and is even more parasitic for the economy, right? Like, not only do private landlords in residential sectors suck money out of the consumptive power on the demand side for regular working people who have high propensity for consumption. That's bad for the economy prima facie, but they need to have businesses to go and spend that money in the first place. And if people can't afford to go into business because they can't afford extortionate rents and can't afford to take the risk on not being able to complete a private contract for that rental agreement with a commercial landlord, they could end up losing everything. Like, why would you take that risk unless you had nothing else left to do, right? It's an insane system. And again, we should just never have privatized this stuff. We should never have privatized it. Think how much extra money that could be being made, right? Because if the council still owned a bunch of commercial real estate in our city centres, for example, currently the business rates, the taxes that you have to pay as a business owner to operate inside a council, is very similar to the market rate being paid by the commercial tenant. So if we just replaced business rates with council rent because the council owned those buildings, the council would get more revenue and the people who are operating their businesses would be paying less in rent and business rates combined, right? It would be so much better for our economy if these things were state-owned. But of course, KKR and Alliance and all these other fucking leech companies, the BlackRocks and Blackstones of this world, the asset managers, have to get their pound of flesh, sucking it out of the economy. As Yanis Varoufakis pointed out very, very well in his interview on Channel 4, is that there's so much rentierism in our economy. People will look at this huge expansionary policy that hasn't seen any growth since 2010. And go, well, the central bank money is not there to foment growth, it's to keep aggregate demand stable so we don't have deflation. We didn't actually pump loads of new money into the economy through quantitative easing and expansionary policy. We would be in like a recession, deflation, doom loop because all their money goes into the pockets of rentiers and landlords who don't then spend that money on commodities that circulate the economy. They spend that money on investing into more property, more assets, which then further inflate the value and make the inequality worse. There are so many good arguments against the very existence of landlords, and whenever I've brought it up with my dad, he's been like, well, renting can be a lot more flexible and a good choice for lots of professions. I mean, it's true. There is plenty of flexibility in renting, but why should it ever have to be a private landlord? Why should it have to be a private landlord? when it could be, obviously the state could do it, but I think the thing that people miss a lot of the time when we have the discussion about landlordism is that actually the real solution for dealing with the need for short-term or to medium-term rental agreements for people who are only going to be in the city for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, right? Is housing cooperatives. Housing cooperatives are like the real solution that we all miss, because we only think in this public or private world rather than thinking in this kind of private sector, but without kind of the leech of rentierism, the parasitism of rentierism, you know? I mean, people wonder why there are all of these obvious kind of money laundering fronts popping up around city centres, is because the people with the money who can afford the extortionate rental payments on prime commercial real estate in city centres are people who are doing money laundering, right? The mom and pop stores of yesteryear, that's not the same thing anymore. I'm surprised we still have so many local businesses in my area. I'm very surprised that local businesses where I live haven't been kind of forced out by sky-high rents and business rates. Like, let's be true. The real problem with money laundering is in the City of London. It's Russian oligarchs. It is financiers from the Emirates, for example. It's not predominantly happening in little American candy shops and Turkish barbers, right? Like, the actual lion's share of money laundering in this country is done through the financial sector, through the City of London. Much bigger scope for money laundering, much easier to be able to hide, and we are the money laundering capital of the world, right? That happens mostly in the City of London. People have their ire directed away deliberately from these people by the fuss that gets kicked up about the Turkish barbershops, because the rich people who are the ones who are doing the money laundering in our capital want to get away with it without scrutiny. Right? Let's actually read Mel Stride's piece now after that 20-minute long tangent. The Chancellor will no doubt tell us she is exercising judicious fiscal discipline, without mentioning that most of the new projects and programmes he announces are paid for with hundreds of billions in extra borrowing. Yes. That's how capital expenditure works, Mel. Maybe you would be a good Chancellor of the Exchequer if you understood the basics of your own job. Yeah, of course it's coming from borrowing to pay for investment. That's what the whole point of expansionary policy is for. I'd focus on what actually moves the dial. Productivity, public service reform, and fiscal responsibility. So the same thing they've done for 15 years that hasn't worked. Yeah, okay, good. That means rooting out waste and being clear-eyed about what government can and cannot afford. Okay, you had all those years in government to root out waste. You said you'd root out waste to make the public sector more efficient, and all you gave us was a drop in service provision. Austerity doesn't work. It's a dangerous idea, as Mark Blythe mentions. And I wouldn't be afraid to say no. Sometimes leadership means doing the difficult thing, not the easy or popular one. The scale of spending being set out next week was confirmed in March, before the Chancellor began being forced into embarrassing U-turns on welfare. We've seen what happens when fiscal credibility is lost. I would never let that happen again. I mean, U-turning on an incredibly cheap policy, like the winter fuel allowance, isn't like a lack of fiscal credibility. That's not going to tank her fiscal credibility in the slightest, right? What is going to is if she doesn't do any proper investment, again, tries to stimulate the demand side of the economy like the IMF would tell them to. Two who've actually been Chancellor but have no intention of being one in the future. Both at least gave policies. This is the guy who is the official shadow Chancellor, and his pitch of what he would do would be offering a serious plan, building stability, driving growth and restoring trust. No gimmicks, just hard truths and a credible path forward. He's literally doing what Rachel Reeves was doing before the election. If I were in government, I would do securonomics, be an adult in the room and press the big red growth button. So, to be fair, he did mention, like, welfare in passing, you know, right here. We didn't talk about welfare cuts, but he's not talked about any policy at all. Literally did not have any policy in the slightest. Just, I would do the good things and not the bad things. To be fair, having no policies is better than having the shit policies that you get from Mr. Stables over here and rude anagram this guy here, you know? Like, having no policies is better than having the shit policies, but you'd think that the Shadow Chancellor would at least have an understanding of what he would do, rather than just a rough outline of the kind of aims that he would have as a Chancellor. No policies, no nothing. Just fiscal responsibility and pressing the growth button. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.